Okay, so chapter 8 in the book of Esther. Remember, we have Haman is gone. We still have this decree out there they've got to solve before Jews start getting executed all over the kingdom. So that's the problem we're dealing with now. Let's jump in. Verse 1. On that day did the king Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, uh, give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. So so basically the king's like, hey, you get to take over Haman's household. They are now your responsibility. It's not an uncommon thing of if an enemy's against you, now you take over their house, basically. And then Esther explains to the king who Mordecai is and how this works. Oh, he is my father, my cousin, basically, but he has adopted me in. And so verse 2, the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. So this is now, to get a king's ring, like we talked about before, that gave Haman tremendous power. Mordecai now has that power. So he is elevated up from just a king's servant to being a more trusted advisor for the king as well. So he's higher up in the kingdom of Persia. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So now Mordecai can do what he wants with Haman's wife and children and family, basically. Knowing Esther, he's probably going to do a pretty good job of being kind to them and forgiving of them, which is good. Verse 3, and Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. So she's pleading, we got to stop this. We've got to deal with this. Then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther rose and stood before the king. So again, she's coming to him going, hey, we got to deal with this. And verse 5, and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? This is her pleading on the emotions of the king we got to solve this problem. Basically, we have to deal with this edict that has gone out there. Verse 7, then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also for the Jews, as it liketh you, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. So again, he's going to issue another irrevocable decree, basically. Verse 9, then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof. So this whole process has taken a couple of months for, to go from the edict being issued to this being resolved. So we're in the 3rd month, basically. So everybody in the kingdom knows by now about this edict. And so in 7 more months, it's going to 9 more months, this edict is going to be executed out on the Jews, basically. So now they've got to figure out how to create a new edict to stop this. So it says, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and to the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to the writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar. So here's the thing. They couldn't stop the edict they had before, which was basically on the 13th day of the 12th month. So to us, that would be December 13th, but that's not completely accurate on how they did their calendar back then. But just to kind of give you a time frame, it would be on the 13th day of the 12th month, Jews are fair game. Execute all the Jews you want. Basically, if they're in the kingdom, you can execute. If they're out of the kingdom, you can't touch them. And so they said, okay, he issued an irrevocable decree. We can't go after, we can't stop it. We can't block this basically because it's an irrevocable decree. So here's the problem. How do we, this means no one can stop the Jews from being executed. So this decree that Mordecai put out said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We can't stop them from executing the Jews. But we can put an edict out that anybody who tries to execute the Jews is fair game to be executed themselves. They can be killed. And if they're killed and their family is wiped out, if the man tries to do it, then his whole family can be wiped out legally. And then you can take their spoil. So we have two edicts going against each other, basically. And so now the people are going, oh yeah, I get to kill Jews. My neighbor's a Jew and I hate my neighbor. Oh, this is great. Oh crap, this edict came out. The Jew can now fight me. I don't know if I want to fight my neighbor now. So the two end up really in reality clashing and nobody really wants to fight. I'm sure there was still some that happened, but basically they said anybody that kills the Jews has it's fair game on them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the Jews. It says here, the Jews were in every city to gather themselves together, to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them. So anybody that tries to take on the Jews can wipe them out, basically. If one of the local rulers says, go execute the Jews can fight the ruler legally, and the king says it's okay. So that probably put a check in there going, maybe we don't want to do that. And the two rules contradicted each other to an extent, but stopped them from happening for the most part. I'm sure it happened some, but probably not to the extent that Haman wanted it to happen, basically. All right, verse 13, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. So the Jews have been thinking in Shushan, they've gone 3 months going, what is going to happen? Crap, what am I going to do? I got to sell my stuff. I got to deal with this. They were in that state of fear, knowing as each day went by, it was closer to the day of their execution. And now they're rejoicing. That day is gone. It technically isn't gone, but the odds that it really happens now is nullified. They used one law to end up counter or nullifying another law, basically. And so that's what's happening here now. So put in the comments, I mean, if you were in this situation, if you had to live in this kind of a regime and suddenly that was lifted, what would that be like for you? How would that feel if all of a sudden that was lifted? Oh, I don't have to worry about that now. That's great. Verse 17, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now this is interesting, that a lot of people were converting to Judaism. Not because they wanted to be Jewish, but because they saw it was a good thing for their longevity, if you will. In Rasmussen's book, Introduction to the Old Testament, he said this: the task of saving the rest of the Jews after Esther and Mordecai had been saved and exalted in the realm was complicated by the announced principle that any edict which had been issued in the king's name could not be revoked. They had to devise a way to give the Jews authority to fight for their lives against those who would try to obey that first edict of death on the 13th day of Adar. Note the typical psychological phenomenon of the conversion of many people to Judaism as they saw the growing power of the Jews in the realm. So you have to realize, as far as Babylonians are concerned, the queen is Jewish, the king's high servant or high advisor is Jewish. The Jews can now fight against people who try to fight them. So this idea of the Jews have elevated status in the kingdom, I want to be a Jew now because I'm going to get that elevated status in the kingdom. So they're not converting because they want to be Jewish or follow the Jewish God, the true God. They wanted to be in that class of people that were highly favored because that allowed them to be more favored, basically. So that's what's happening there. So thankfully they got it resolved. They got that taken care of. Now the beauty is we still have 2 more chapters left in Esther. So let's see what happens in this next chapter after all this craziness has happened with this experience with the Jews.